Welcome to the Darnell and Cody Show, where we talk about social, political, and philosophical issues currently relevant to us as a society. Today we're going to be talking about the Catholic Church, explaining what the Catholic Church is, the differences between the Catholic Church and other sects of Christianity. We're going to be getting into the sex abuse scandals within the Catholic Church, and last but not least, we're going to be talking about the reform that we feel the Catholic Church and churchgoers should demand on the Church itself. So, first off, I would like to explain what the Catholic Church exactly is. The Catholic Church is its own type of government with diplomatic sovereignty. It is considered the smallest country in the world, which is the Vatican City. And Mussolini, the fascist dictator and ally to Hitler, was the one who created the Vatican State back in 1929. And interestingly enough, the Catholic Church made demands of Mussolini himself to basically compensate them for lost Papal States territories throughout the course of the Catholic Church history, which finally he gave up.
What can you tell us about the hierarchy of command within the Catholic Church?
Well, every single church within the Catholic Church answers to the Vatican in some way or another. They all follow the hierarchy chain of command that exists within the Church itself, the head being the Pope, who the Catholic Church says is able to speak directly with God. So priests answer to bishops, bishops answer to archbishops, who then answer to cardinals, and cardinals answer to the Pope himself. And bishops run dioceses, which are collections of churches. Maybe there's 8 to 20 churches within the diocese. Archbishops run archdioceses, which are collections of dioceses. And there is exactly 2,886 bishops on the planet, and there are 645 archbishops on the planet. That means that they're the same number of dioceses and archdioceses.
And what can you tell us? About the differences between the sects of Christianity?
Well, the Catholic Church feels that they are the first church of Jesus when Jesus said to Peter, who they consider the first pope, "Peter, you are my rock." And that is what they consider the creation of the church, and Jesus deemed him the first leader of the church itself. So Catholics believe that they must consume the Eucharist, which is actually a piece of bread that they specially make, that then a priest transmortifies through a religious ceremony into the body of Christ in order to be consumed, and they believe that a person needs to consume this in order to go to heaven. They also believe that you must confess your sins to a priest, and you also must live a good life, and not just believe in Jesus' word. They also believe that the Pope is a recipient of divine commands, not just coming from the Bible, but from the Pope himself. And priests are also married to God. They cannot be married to any other human being, and they are sworn to celibacy. And this is one of the theories of why there is so much widespread scandals within the church itself. There has been widespread accusations and proven cases starting back in the 20th century and increasing greatly around 1960s with sexual abuse scandals, priests molesting children. And the priest has spent decades trying to cover this up, relocating offending priests, using taxes to silence the families of victims. They've even known about these offenders for quite long periods of time, sending them for psychiatric help instead of reporting the crimes to the police, which is how the law demands a person that knows of a crime to respond to such a crime. So the Catholic Church has actually broken the law by knowingly hiding these criminals. And that is a crime in and of itself that they have not been answered for as of yet. And this became a very wide sensation around 2001, 2002 area when the media was reporting on this very greatly. And since 2004, there have been 400 cases of sexual abuse within the Vatican itself. Only 848 of the offenders were defrocked. 2,572 were simply given lesser punishments and allowed to stay within the church's services. Notably, the numbers of reports peaked around the same time as the heavy news coverage, which followed after this time period when they started making defrocks of the priests themselves. So we can all assume that they were covering many of these cases up for years and waited until essentially the last second to begin punishing sexual criminals. Even years after the scandals were happening, the church is still caught letting some child molesters stay in the service, such as the case in Archdiocese of Boston, where the Secretary of Ministerial Personnel was there punishing some of the offenders very greatly and giving small punishment to other offenders, some who were personal friends of the ministerial personnel. And one of them included a priest who molested over 130 children during his ministry. There's also been widespread accounts of nun sexual abuse. Some of them have even been considered in slave-like conditions, where they are giving sexual performances to priests against their will. And this is another thing that the Catholic Church has covered up. And they've finally acknowledged that this is happening recently. Excuse me. But this was a problem for decades that was getting minor reporting, and they really never acknowledged it until now, which is just another heinous crime to humanity that the Catholic Church has covered up for years and years.
Right. And I'm not personally concerned too much about Catholic theology or history, but I am concerned about the problems that the Catholic Church is propagating in modern society. Religion, for better or worse, is a great part of human behavior and perhaps has even an evolutionary component to it. And it should be respected, if not for its merit, then for its scope and relevance throughout the history of human motives. Under that context, I have no wish to mock or otherwise disparage what I would normally consider a very outdated and stark view of the universe. Instead, I would like to focus on what the church is doing wrong from a societal point of view and how we can amend that, and what our role is as outsiders in regards to its shortcomings. And it's not fair for us to generalize an entire religion over the actions of a few, and I don't think that's our goal here. Coming from Cody, he's not criticizing, he's just stating the basic history of the church and why we are in a situation like this. Not particularly because of their theology, but because the actions of a few that are in a position of power to abuse the system, so to speak. So we're not trying to out there in a witch hunt for or against Catholicism. We're just saying that it's horrid that even a few priests have done what they did, and the fact that the Catholic Church as an organization have been covering up this mess, and it just adds on to the horror. People are supposed to go to their priests to confess their sins and seek spiritual guidance. It goes against not just the teachings of Christ, but the basic decency of human beings to sexually assault a child. So while we do have to hold the Catholic Church as an organization responsible for being complicit in all this and trying to cover up these scandals rather than trying to confront them, we also have to be careful not to hold all Catholics responsible for this. It's similar to the situation we have with the Muslims being regarded as terrorists. Not all Muslims were going around flying planes into buildings. It was the actions of a minority, an alarming minority to be sure. And to be clear, just one priest molesting a child is unacceptable. Just one Muslim extremist blowing up a plane or a bomb to kill people is unacceptable. But we can't use these minority actions to represent the majority. And basically, I guess, which leads us to, what do you think about the Catholics perhaps leaving the church, making their own church with all the traditions and practices? So like they keep the Eucharist and whatnot, but simply not being able to, or not being under the main body of Catholicism not answering to the Pope. If that is that a valid solution, or because I do see the problem that Catholicism is rooted in this historical ritual and structure that I fear is intrinsic to its entity. So I would still much rather prefer that Catholics fight and reform rather than running away and forming their own church. But that may be a method that is the best way they can pursue a peaceful resistance and speak out and protest against the corruption of the church. What do you think about this?
Well, I think you made a great point earlier about the fact there's a great difference between the individual Catholic who's a churchgoer and a believer of Jesus Christ, and the Catholic Church is an institution itself, so that's a good distinction to make there. I think that Catholics should definitely consider making their own churches if they can get a priest to go with them and do this, because as I said, they're going to need that Eucharist, which a priest can do the ritual for, and they're not going to be able to do it according to their own belief. If a priest is willing to do that, that would be fantastic. I feel like they may run into problems there as all these gentlemen work for the Catholic Church at the end of the day and answer to the chain of command that they do. But I think that's a great solution for short term, at least. I feel like they could probably find some priests who would be willing to do that with them if that's what they felt was necessary. I do feel that the average churchgoer should at least stop giving their money to the church until these scandals are properly handled, because at this moment they're basically funding a crime organization in some way or another. Some of that money may go to the good, most of it probably does, to be honest, but at the end of the day, these people are still committing crime by not following the way that the law is supposed to be handled, where if you know that the crime is happening, you report it. You don't cover it up for years. You don't try and get these gentlemen help. You do what the law demands, and that's to report it as soon as you know it's happening.
And it truly is a difficult task for us outsiders to get involved in this. All we can really do is let the Catholics know that we care and want these problems fixed for all of our sakes. I don't want a predatory system imposed on anybody, especially children who are helpless to fight back in most cases. So it's almost a moral imperative at this point that we get involved in some way we can, even if it's just talking about it and raising awareness from our armchairs. But going back to solutions and reformations that are needed, what do you think are the key solutions that we can bring about, not as Catholics, but something that we can suggest to Catholics that maybe, hey guys, like we're not Catholics, but maybe you should consider reformations into account? What would you recommend?
Well, as I said, stop giving money to the church is the first thing to go about it. That's the one you're going to let them know that you're upset that something's happening that you don't agree with. You're not going to fund it until something's done. That's a good way to start, at least. As you said before, that was a good short-term solution, I felt like, for at least demanding reform. You know, I'm not going to go to the church. I want a priest to come to my house and perform church at my house with my neighbors instead. The church might respond to that and know that people aren't happy because people are asking for this as well. But really, people should be demanding that the church is accountable for itself. These priests should be looking out for other priests that are doing sin according to their own belief, and they should be reporting these people to the police, not trying to handle it within the church as they have done. And that is really the solution here, is for local authority to handle the solutions that the law deems that they need to, not for the church to try and cover this up and even fix it in some twisted way that they think is an actual fix, when really it just makes the situation worse in a lot of cases. This is the real reform that we're going to need to see in order to get real change within the church. And people should be demanding this from the church. because otherwise it may not happen, unfortunately. As we've seen, this has gone on for years and years, so we're really going to need to see people changing their behavior in order to see change from the church, I feel.
Right. So to sum it up then, the Catholic Church needs to be held accountable for its actions. The priests and organizations should be reported to local law enforcement if they commit a crime. The church needs to be proactive in giving severe punishment to offending priests, and there needs to be a real conversation about reforming the celibacy rule for priests. And perhaps it's time to even let nuns do more than just be a sidekick and let them become a priestess that have the same responsibility as a priest. Furthermore, perhaps it's time for Catholics to protest against the church by seceding from it if necessary, although the most ideal situation would be for Catholics to band together and bring true reform bottom up rather than wait for the solution to resolve top down from the Pope, the bishops, and so forth. And I think conversations like this are needed so that we, even as outsiders, can be aware and supportive in what ways we can to help our fellow man. And that's what's really all this is about at the end of the day. We're not out here trying to help out Catholics and Catholicism. We're here trying to help out the next person in line, the people next to us, viewing him as a human being that happens to be a Catholic, not a Catholic that happens to be a human being. Without that distinction, we're really not doing anybody a service. So our motives here are very clear. We're really here to improve Catholicism for the sake of humanity and for those that subscribe to its faith also.
Exactly. I'm not trying to insult Catholics in any way. Obviously, I feel Catholics are generally great people. There's just a few deviants within their organization right now that are unfortunately giving the organization itself a bad light, and they can take care of this with reform, as we've said, and hopefully they will come out better afterward.
And I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening, everyone.